today's video, we'll be looking at two real caving stories that went terribly wrong. The first one involves a passage that slowly closed in on someone who had safely passed through it before, and the following one only gets harder to hear. As always, viewer discretion is advised. March 14th, 2018. Evan Mercer entered a deep backcountry section of Mammoth Cave in Kentucky with his teammates, Luke Hanratty and Owen Price. They were experienced cavers, familiar with the system, and the plan was to map an extended route through non-tourist passages. Mammoth Cave was known for its massive network of horizontal tunnels and subtle pressure zones stretching over 400 miles of explored passages. The group felt confident in their abilities and in their knowledge of the terrain. They didn't realize that the cave they thought they knew had quietly changed. As they moved deeper, the temperature dropped to a constant 54 degrees, and the air grew still and damp. Their headlamps lit narrow limestone walls, worn smooth by centuries of water, but shadows pressed close around them. The ceiling lowered gradually as they progressed, forcing them to crouch, then crawl. At first, everything felt manageable, but the deeper they went, the more the ceiling seemed to press down. The walls narrowed in places, forcing them to turn sideways and exhale fully just to squeeze through. They reached a horizontal squeeze they had all passed through months earlier, a section known for its tight fit but considered stable. It was a crawl they'd navigated before without incident, a routine obstacle in a familiar system. The team paused to assess it, checking their gear, catching their breath before continuing. Looking back, the first warning sign appeared here. The passage felt tighter than Evan remembered, but only slightly, just enough to make him adjust his entry angle. At the time, they dismissed it as nothing more than a trick of memory or the bulk of their packs, but it would matter soon. Evan entered the squeeze second in line, moving carefully on his stomach. As he crawled forward, his chest slipped into the narrow gap, pressed against the stone floor and ceiling. He tried to pull himself through using his arms, but the rock held him. He twisted, pushed with his legs, shifted his hips, but nothing moved. The stone pressed into his ribs and sternum, sending a dull, spreading ache through his torso. His breathing quickened as the realization set in. He was stuck. The ceiling wasn't collapsing, it was simply there, unyielding, compressing his chest with every inhale. His ribs scraped against limestone as he tried to shift his weight. The pressure on his hips kept him locked in place. The cold stone pulled heat from his body through his clothing. Each breath felt shallower than the last. His lungs couldn't expand fully against the rock. He tried arching his back to create space, but the ceiling pressed down harder. He exhaled completely, tried to slide forward, but his body wouldn't budge. Minutes stretched into an hour. The cold stone drained the heat from his body, turning shivers into numbness. His voice echoed weakly in the tight space, but there was no room to move. Every attempt to shift sent a new surge of pain through his chest and ribs. The silence, the darkness, the pressure, all blended into a slow rising panic. He tried to stay calm, but each breath felt heavier than the last. His inhales grew shorter, forced into the tiny space his lungs could still occupy. The rock didn't crush him, it simply refused to let him breathe deeply enough. His fingers went numb from the cold, his legs began to cramp. The group around him grew silent, their confidence fading. They tried tugging his legs, pushing at his shoulders, shifting his weight inch by inch. Nothing helped. Luke whispered something about the passage feeling narrower than before, and dread began to spread through the group. Owen ran his hands along the walls, searching for any give in the stone, but found none. They dug at the floor beneath Evan's chest, clawing at dirt and small rocks, but the solid limestone offered no relief. Eventually, Luke made the decision to get help. He and Owen crawled back out, navigating the passage in reverse, racing to the surface. Rescuers arrived within hours, carrying chisels, webbing, and hydraulic tools, but progress was agonizingly slow. The narrow passage allowed almost no room to work. They chipped at the rock, widening the gap by inches, and reassessed constantly, Each strike echoed through the cave like a warning, but the horizontal squeeze made positioning nearly impossible. Every tool had to be passed hand to hand through the same corridor that had trapped Evan. The rescuers worked in shifts, their bodies exhausted from the cramped positions and relentless effort. They made small gains, a quarter inch here, a half inch there, but time was running out. The stone seemed to resist every effort, as though the cave itself had decided to hold on. By the time rescuers reached him, it was too late. He had suffocated from chest compression in the same position he'd been trapped in. Recovering his body took days of careful excavation. In the end, it wasn't just the cave that trapped him. It was a series of small choices that hadn't seemed dangerous until it was too late. Underground, those details decide everything. If that felt claustrophobic, this next one is even worse. August 9th, 2021, Daniel Rowe, 29, entered Wind Cave in South Dakota, exploring a remote crawlway between the mapped tourist routes. He was an experienced caver with years of underground navigation, and the plan was to document an unmapped section of low-profile passages. The cave was known for its complex airflow and poor ventilation in certain pockets. A result of its maze-like structure, Daniel felt confident in his skills and in his ability to recognize danger. He didn't realize that the air itself could become a trap. As he moved deeper, the temperature dropped to the mid-50s and the air grew heavy and motionless. His headlamp lit rough calcite walls and a ceiling that descended lower with each crawl forward. Shadows pressed close, the silence was absolute, broken only by his breathing and the scrape of his body against stone. At first, everything felt manageable, but the deeper he went, the more the passage forced him flat against the floor. The walls narrowed until his shoulders barely fit, and the ceiling pressed down until he could no longer lift his head. He reached a section that narrowed into a low, flat crawl, a tunnel barely 18 inches high, stretching ahead into darkness. He took a breath, lowered himself onto his stomach, and began to crawl. Looking back, the first warning sign appeared here. The air felt dense, harder to breathe, but Daniel assumed it was anxiety from the tight space. At the time, he dismissed it as nothing more than the strain of crawling, but it would matter soon. As he crawled forward, his chest pressed flat against the floor, forcing shallow breaths. He pulled himself ahead using his forearms, but his breathing felt ineffective. Each inhale seemed to do nothing. He paused, thinking rest would help, but the sensation only worsened. The pressure on his chest made every breath incomplete, and a strange heaviness settled into his limbs. He shifted, trying to create space for his lungs, but the rock held him. His muscles weakened, unresponsive, as though his body was forgetting how to move. The cold stone pressed into his ribs and hips, and his coordination began to slip. He tried to reverse pushing with his toes, pulling with his elbows, but his arms felt too heavy to respond. His vision blurred at the edges. His thoughts scattered. Minutes stretched into 10, maybe 15. The cold stone still pulled at his heat, but it wasn't the cold that was killing him. It was the air, or the lack of it. His breathing grew rapid, shallow, but brought no relief. Carbon dioxide had settled low to the ground, pooling exactly where his face was pressed. No smell, no warning. Just an invisible weight that grew heavier with each breath. His vision tunneled down to a small point of light from his headlamp. His thoughts slowed, his mind unable to form a plan. Every attempt to move felt like dragging himself through water. The silence and darkness blurred together, the tunnel stretching endlessly in both directions. He tried to stay calm, but his body was shutting down faster than his mind could process. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, irregular, frantic, but his limbs refused to obey. His fingers scraped weakly at the stone, searching for purchase. The exit was within arm's reach, just a few more feet, but his body had already stopped responding. His breaths became gasps, then whispers, and finally, nothing at all. He lost consciousness lying on his stomach, his headlamp shining uselessly ahead into the dark. The passage didn't collapse. There was no water, no injury, no obstruction. The air simply ran out. A fellow caver found him hours later, motionless in the same crawl. They called for help immediately, but there was nothing to be done. Daniel was unresponsive, his body cold to the touch. Rescuers later tested the air, confirming dangerously high carbon dioxide levels. The poor ventilation had created a pocket of bad air, settled exactly where a crawling person's face would be. By the time help arrived, he had already suffocated from hypercapnia, carbon dioxide buildup compounded by chest restriction. Recovering his body required careful navigation through that same low passage. In the end, it wasn't just the cave that trapped him. It was a series of small choices that didn't seem dangerous until it was too late. Underground, those details decide everything. Caves don't forgive mistakes, even the smallest detail, a missed sign, a narrow crack. One piece of bad gear can change everything underground. Stay safe and respect the dark places where daylight can't follow.